Now, I would like to introduce you to our facilitators for this workshop, Carrie-Anne Ayres and Charlotte Bonner from ETF. Carrie-Anne and Charlotte, over to you.
Thanks very much, Emily, and thank you all for joining us today. And as Emily has said, I'm National Head of Technical Education and Charlotte is National Head for Education for Sustainable Development. I hope you've been enjoying the conference as much as I have today, and thank you for selecting this session. So just to have an overview of what we'll take a look at in the session, we'll first of all have a look at the technical education landscape and set context. We'll look at the apprentice journey and the importance of developing T-shaped learners, whether we're talking about teachers, trainers, apprentices or other learners, and the importance of agency. And then we'll apply an ESD lens and explore resources and the workforce development support that's available to you at no cost. So as Emily said, please do use the chat box for any comments, questions, challenges, whether you want to agree, disagree, and anything you'd like us to signpost to and answer in the question and answer session later, and also anything you'd like us to follow up perhaps after the session. So to make us start then, talking about context setting. I think, you know, in the last few months, we've had a number of conferences where we've heard loudly that further education is the future. And I think it's really important after the panel session this morning that we think of that as the full further education sector, whether we're talking about independent training providers, colleges, sixth forms, adult and community learning, the justice sector, our collective efforts. We all know that further education transforms lives and empowers peoples and communities, and focusing through FE on technical skills will lie at the heart of post-COVID and post-Brexit economic recovery, socially, environmentally, and economically. And that's really why we're sharing here these ESD goals, because we know that high quality technical education through apprenticeships, T-levels or other are going to be key to sustainable development.
So when we're talking about sustainable development and education for sustainable development, although they're not without criticism, I think the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a really useful tool for introducing the themes of education for sustainable development, because they really clearly and simply demonstrate the breadth of sustainability. This isn't just about the bins and the light bulbs, folks. It's really about how do we use, as Carrie-Anne's just said, education to help enable us to achieve these really broad goals that will help us achieve a more just and sustainable future that align with our national goals in the UK, but international goals that we've committed to as well. So your organisation, you may have some work already that looks at some of these areas. All of you will be involved in number 4, quality education. But and biodiversity, wildlife, whether it's looking at societal justice, reducing poverty, enhancing access to healthcare, reducing inequalities, whether it's about economies and about economic growth and about all of us have a role to play, and every subject specialism and occupational pipeline has a role to play in achieving these goals too. In terms of some of the drivers, I think for a long time, ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, a really hard place to read about whether that's part of the education system. But I really feel there's a shift happening. The government has multiple sustainability goals. Some are international, like the Sustainable Development Goals I just showed you. Others are domestic. The Committee on Climate Change has challenged the Department for Education to work with the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice and the DWP to reduce carbon emissions for the sector, but also to use education to support the transition to a net zero economy. So looking at our carbon emissions as a society, and also to ensure a just transition transitioning from high carbon to low carbon or climate resilient jobs. And of course, with the pandemic, that's even more heightened. You know, we really need to look at how we can create COVID employment that also has sustainability embedded throughout it. So the 10-point plan that the government published just before Christmas is the biggest government commitment to sustainability since 2008. And it's led to the establishment of a Green Jobs Task Force to set the direction for the job market as we transition out of COVID and into a more sustainable economy. And so the government intends to publish a plethora of strategies this year, both coming from the Green Jobs Task Force, but also in the run-up to COP26, which is the big international climate change conference where governments come together to set out how we're going to collectively reduce emissions in different sectors, ranging from things, everything in between. And I think that's going to be particularly important for the UK this year. It's the largest international event we've ever hosted, and it's the first post-Brexit. So it's really going to help position the UK as a leader in this field. And the other thing that links to that came out of the Green Jobs Task Force, I think, is that IFATE have recently established a chips panel and an advisory community, and they're going to look at how to enhance existing apprenticeships to ensure that they meet the needs of employers within a growing green economy, and also create new apprenticeships to reflect new occupations that are needed to meet the challenge of a sustainable future. So alongside kind of the work that's coming out of IFATE and the government, there was some recent work done by the UK Climate Commission for HE and FE leaders and students. That's resulted in a climate action roadmap. It's for colleges. I think they've missed a trick there, but I think it really showcases how different education organisations can take a whole organisation approach to sustainability. And then there's numerous briefings from academia, industry, trade that show the economic benefits of this transition to a sustainable economy and the critical need for investment in skills and training to deliver that transition. There's a reference there to the Aldersgate Group. They represent businesses that have, I think last year their collective turnover was £650 billion worldwide, so big businesses, and their policy briefing said that they're able meet their goals. They wanted to see ESD, sustainable development messaging, embedded across the whole education system and in training and in lifelong learning. And you see similar messages from the OECD, from National Grid, from RICS, from a whole host of different trade bodies. Critical to the uptake of ESD will be the competency and capacity of education professionals, and that's an area where the ETF is looking to really support this transition. We're doing some research into experiences of ESD across the sector, but we have strong evidence to suggest that 3/4 of people in our world feel like they haven't received training themselves to educate learners about sustainability issues. But there's a real appetite to do so. And similarly, learner demand is just huge. There was just before COVID, there was a whole host of different protests from students, but research consistently shows that learner demand is strong. And this isn't about leveraging skills specifically just for green jobs, in construction or in manufacturing or in agriculture or in energy systems. What I'm talking about is really making sure that have the knowledge and the skills and the values and the agency that they need to be able to be part of that sustainable and just future. And so if we could just flip onto the next slide, Carrie-Anne. Here's a quote from UNESCO, who are one of the leaders internationally about ESD. And really, this is about quality education. It's about lifelong learning. And so, regardless of whether your learners are studying food or hairdressing or horticulture or construction, we believe that there's ways to interrelate those specialisms with sustainable development to help contribute to the realisation of those goals, and opportunities to use sustainable development themes as a way of teaching topics such as languages, literacy, maths, digital skills, etc. So that's the ESD lens that we'll be looking at today.
So thank you, Charlotte. And picking up there, so to improve the skills base is kind of really where we are. And that's against those grand challenges of AI, data economy, clean growth, and thinking about social mobility and mobility in general, and aging society, and getting more skilled workers so they have a better chance of well-paid jobs, and then improving our economic performance. And it will be about investing in people, so the skills of people, the skills of our apprentices. But you know, the need has been there for technical reforms through apprenticeships, through T-levels. And what we look at as the UK's productivity puzzle, the fact that we had an increase till around 2006 and then a plateau. And what we could see is that we're 22% productivity gap with Germany, 18% with France, and this being due to skills and the rest being due to investment in workers. With an estimate that if we were to match Germany in terms of skills levels at level 3, that could result in an extra 4.6 billion per year. And the benefit to young people of achieving level 3 qualifications to include advanced apprenticeships rather than level 2, giving that extra kind of earning capacity for them, would affect many people. But as we've said today, and it's been a key theme, that it's also the transition of people to reach level 2, that 50%, and what we're doing about traineeships and so on, and the support for individuals from entry point. So what we know in the UK is we have some of the biggest regional variations in terms of productivity. And we know that education and skills outcomes vary significantly regionally, and employers cite that education and skills are strongly correlated with productivity. And so there's a real opportunity really to think that when we have what we would think are opportunity areas where we know there are disadvantaged individuals, it's to look at our localized provision here that we've been talking about a lot today, because we know that that people in disadvantaged areas are less likely to achieve level 3 qualifications by the age of 25, and we know that income and average earnings are closely dependent on the higher level of qualification achieved. And beyond that, it's kind of looking at what we know and hear from skills surveys from employers. You know, they state the lack of suitably skilled applicants, qualified applicants, those with suitable experience. But it's thinking about the implications of that, the increased workload for staff, the operating costs, the delayed development of new products and services. And a lot of people have talked today about the importance of innovation, and also the difficulty with introducing new working practices and responding to technological advancements, and actually the new working practices that we've had to introduce as a result of COVID-19 challenges. So the prize of technical reforms is to have these clear and well-respected routes to work and further learning, to ensure social mobility for all, improve productivity and meeting the changing needs of work. So it won't ever be about T-levels versus apprenticeships. It will be the right programs or courses for individuals, what suits them best so they can achieve their aspirations, ensuring there are those mobility ladders, and making sure for productivity to increase that we've got a curriculum that is fit for purpose, a curriculum with intent, standards that are industry-led, that we've got a teaching and training workforce capable of delivering across those levels, and then utilising the skills in the workplace. And there are a number of disruptive technologies shaping the future of the workplace, and therefore shaping the future of learning and work, really, whether it's robotics, genomics, energy storage, whether it's renewable energies, smart materials. And what we can see in many of the standards and the occupational maps is when we look at the knowledge, skills and core behaviours, we can see that in some of those, the maps, the very real need that employers have stated for ethical behaviours, and those that apprentices and others who consider sustainable development as it's a core behaviour for us to develop. So what we'll know is that there are many new jobs, as Charlotte has said, talking about green jobs of the future, and technology shaping the way in which we work and therefore shaping careers of the future, and the importance of us keeping abreast of that and being able to share that with parents, apprentices, and so on, because there will be those replacement jobs, and it's looking at the labour market information and keeping abreast of that. So that's really what's on offer, I think, is a vision of skills and human capital. And it's making sure that people have, all individuals have access to high quality, impartial information, advice and guidance about careers, about their progression pathways. And as we heard from the apprentices at lunchtime, that many of them, I mean, one of them in particular, had been to university, studied for 2 years and realized that an apprenticeship would have been better for her, and left university. And she said it wasn't really discussed at school level with her. And another apprentice, a new skirt, saying similarly, that basically that they hadn't received that careers information, advice and guidance within their schooling to even consider that. But also parental influence, where parents didn't really think if apprenticeship would be a suitable offer, because they were thinking that university needed to be the progression pathway. So it was really interesting hearing from the apprentices on the panel today. And it's that feature, isn't it, that I know as independent training providers, there's a lot of technical provision offered, but apprenticeships provide those clear escalators to higher level learning and employment. And they do represent a genuine, real option for many learners. And it's making sure that people are aware of apprenticeships and what they could mean to them. And we're seeing a lot of change through COVID, really. And we've seen increased demand in FE providers for science, technology and engineering maths subjects. And therefore there is a need, we're hearing, for recruitment of technical teachers from industry who can give that clear line of sight to work. And I would like to signpost to our Taking Teaching Further programme that is helping FE providers to recruit to these technical teaching roles, often in hard to fill teaching roles. So please do pick up with me on that later if you'd like to know more about that. We're also seeing in the Ofsted COVID-19 series the increased uptake of health and social care and other STEM subjects. And there's been a recent inquiry into equity in STEM education and workplace. And we can see that through that report, that 59% of young people were actually very concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on their future. But now 37% of the young people are more likely to consider scientific careers, which is a real positive. With learner voice, you know, it's been really great to see these kinds of pieces of feedback where young learners are saying that actually having seen healthcare workers and research and development workers during COVID-19, it's inspired them to want to go into research and development and healthcare careers and to plug those kind of skill shortages. And for others where they thought that maybe science really wasn't for them, that they can see stability in these kinds of careers, amongst other technical careers. But actually they are also commenting that through COVID-19, science has become much more accessible. It's more people have been able to increase their scientific literacy and understanding, science for public understanding, and it's enabled people to look at these kinds of careers potentially. So let's just take a look at the apprenticeship journey, really. And I think, you know, it is about connecting with individuals, whether they are going to be your future apprentices or they're going to study something else with you. But it's understanding who they are, how they live, what motivates and excites them. Do they genuinely care about sustainable development? Not because it's in an occupational standard, but because it's a passion of theirs as it is so readily for so many young people. And these are the kind of statistics that we start to see through NUS Global Survey. 80% of learners say they want their institution to be doing something more about sustainability, and 60% want to learn more. And 83% of learners would like to see sustainable development actually incorporated in their courses. There's a want from the learners, but we're actually seeing employers writing it into standards, and we see it embedded in occupational maps. And there's a real move for that teaching of education for sustainable development. But as Charlotte would say, there's a lot of work to do. So when we're thinking of the apprentice journey, you know, we're all there supporting apprentices each stage of that journey. But I want to focus in on recruitment and careers, education, information, advice and guidance. And to really question with you, where does that begin? Because for me, that begins back at primary school, working with parents and young pupils, and then in secondary schools and so on. Working so that people understand what their options are and that apprenticeships are a real option for them, or T-levels are, but they understand what their options are from the onset, so that it's not, you know, A-levels are the route and university. It'll be the right course for the students based on their aspirations. And then if we do that, we will guard against this kind of feedback. And I heard it again lunchtime today at the apprentice panel, where people think the apprentices said that they didn't receive good quality careers, information, advice and guidance. There was little discussion with them about apprenticeships. They had little support. Other people have fed back to secure an apprenticeship. They felt as if they had to do that bit on their own. The assessment process hadn't been explained to them. They didn't understand gateway and endpoint assessment. And some apprentices have previously fed back that they were struggling to manage their 20% off the job and getting the time allocations right. So it's kind of helping people to progress with their learning. So there are 4 key characteristics of what make excellent technical teaching and learning. And this really came out of the Cavital report, picked up through the Sainsbury's review and so on. And that's having that clear line of sight to work. Having dual professional teachers and trainers who update their subject knowledge and skills, but keep abreast of the labour market information and can share that with their learners. And they're working closely with employers on co-curriculum design, planning and delivery, making sure that they're upskilling and their learners and apprentices on using industry standard kit, and that they understand those clear escalators so they can better advise and give impartial advice and guidance. And I think that really comes, you know, as well, if we think of schools and colleges, they've been looking at the Gatsby benchmarks and achieving that, and what makes good quality careers, information, advice and guidance. And I just wanted to flag that I know that AELP are now working closely with the Careers Enterprise Company to make sure that there is kind of the address of the Gatsby benchmarks in a broader sense through independent training providers. So I think you'll be seeing quite a lot more of that, and much more focus on FE kind of resources rather than schools as the whole kind of support evolves. But if we think of where Ofsted are, there is a clear focus on making sure that there are escalators to higher level learning, that there are clear career pathways, that apprentices make progress relative to their starting points. And there is that curriculum there that has that clear line of sight to work, and it's accessible to all. So it's addressing social mobility. So here's a vision, really. The vision is to have the curriculum with intent that's fit for purpose, aligned to industry needs, about putting sustainability at the heart of the curriculum. So whether you're thinking about construction and low carbon technologies, or whether you're thinking about transport and electrification of cars, natural opportunities to teach in with regards to sustainable development. Not because, again, that it's in a standard or an occupational map, but because it's the right thing to do for our sustainable development. And I just also wanted to share with you that there is a Teach To framework, which is a maturation model available on the ETF website that really helps FE providers to work more closely with employers, which I know ITPs do brilliantly. But it's the way of working in terms of co-curriculum design, planning and delivery. And it's a maturation model that you move from awareness, use to embedding and to have high impact and for continuous improvement. And there's lots of case studies, resources and frameworks. And what I wanted to do was share with you just a couple of case studies of people who've been involved and used these frameworks and tools. So first of all, there's 3 examples. Plumpton College, it's a rural agricultural college in East Sussex. And what they had done is been working very closely with employers to design the curriculum, to make use of digital technology, to make sure they invest in people and practice more than technology, but they prioritize the use of emerging technology for accessibility. So they've been working with British Airways, large-scale employers and SMEs. And some of the work that they've been involved in is running training for British Airways employees so that they can deliver apprenticeships themselves, and working with animal osteopathy and horticultural businesses to make sure that there's apprenticeship delivery to grow the talent pipeline post-Brexit. And it's also about the fact that teachers and employers have developed e-learning materials. So that's sometimes been online masterclasses that can be watched by learners and teachers actually, so that they can understand current working practices and they can learn flexibly. And there's also been use of virtual reality, so that for learners, SEND learners who can't access certain environments, and for others when we're thinking about it hasn't been practical to actually work in a particular environment. And we heard the apprentice speak at lunchtime about it. It was 2 years before they could actually work in the particular environment. So how important virtual reality had been for them for simulated practicals. Then if we turn to Exeter and Exeter College, they work very closely with employers looking at big data and the growth in data analytics and data science jobs. And then what they've done is worked with schools so that school pupils and teachers could better understand what those career progression pathways could be. And then that's been in partnership with employers, stakeholders, the Institutes of Technology, the LEP, to make sure that that's part of the big data impact lab and sustainable futures, aiming for net zero by 2030 in this particular locality. So it's a real joined up picture. And then a final example for me, thinking about how FE providers have worked very closely with employers, comes from University College Birmingham, where in a particular department they wanted a horizon scan and think, did they have a curriculum that was fit for purpose? So what they did is they used some of the toolkits that are available on the ETF website, the Teach To frameworks and toolkits. They looked at the strengths in their team and their industry links. They looked at opportunities through emerging technologies and what they thought they wanted their curriculum to look like. They looked at their aspirations and then what their end results could be that would support increased recruitment and making sure their workforce was suitably trained. And to give the example, because it was in the beauty department, when they did their skills analysis, they found many of their staff, 60% of their staff, were very confident in their knowledge and skills in skincare science, but less were confident in their knowledge and skills of chemical peels, needling, epilation, aesthetics, tattooing, and laser arts, for all of those kinds of things that apparently are in demand now. And so what they did is they started to look at apprenticeship providers, the employers they work with, professional bodies, and then they worked with them to upskill staff, to bring employers in on co-curriculum design, planning and delivery, and they were able to refresh their curricula, making sure that it was a curricula with intent, meeting the needs of individuals, those in their communities, and then businesses. So this leads me to talk to you about the T-shaped learner and the importance of agency. And I'm not really just speaking about this for our apprentices or learners. I would put this for all of us as teachers and trainers, thinking about the importance of us developing the transferable professional skills. What do we know about the industry sector in which we work? What are the technological innovations? What are the new practices and ways of working? Because it won't just be about technology for use in the classroom. It's the technology that's being used in the workplace, and how much teachers can learn from their apprentices working in different environments, for example. Then all of us developing our transferable personal qualities alongside our subject knowledge, practical skills, and professional practice. And in doing so as professionals, you'll see I've kind of listed off the 8 Gatsby benchmarks. That will help us, if we understand the labour market, to give that personal guidance, to make sure the curriculum is truly learning to linking to careers and so forth. So when we look at some other surveys, sort of the CBI survey in Pearson, 74% of employers were satisfied with the academic ability of young people. But again, we're seeing that 2 in 5 employers were dissatisfied with character, behaviours and attributes. So again, this being a really important area, the soft skill development. And when we look at Pearson's Global Learner Survey, we can see that 88% of individuals believe people need to take responsibility for their own learning and upskilling. And this is just so important when we think of apprenticeships, with that triadic relationship between employers, teacher trainers, and apprentices that do have agency. And again, it was so lovely to hear from the apprentices at lunchtime, because when some of them had been furloughed, they then volunteered to think what post-COVID recovery would look like, volunteered as in healthcare roles, and actually making the most of developing their transferable and interoperable skills. And it's that kind of agency, because it develops those employability and transferable skills. So thinking about agency at low level, perhaps we could ask apprentices to think about establishing their personal goals and career aspirations, reflecting on strengths and areas for development, and encouraging them to keep a journal of what they pick up in work and want to do more of when they're back at a provider, or when they're at a provider thinking what they want to follow up with their work mentor. And perhaps at a higher level, thinking about agency, it's bringing apprentices and learners into the design of their teaching and learning, so it's optimized for them through live projects. They can be encouraged to direct their own learning using teachers and trainers as facilitators or consultants, and using their apprenticeship perhaps as networking opportunities with their peers. They're all working in different SMEs or large-scale employers, and they can learn from each other as we can learn from them. And it's that partnership approach, which we saw in the SDG goals, partnerships for goals, really. So thinking about induction and that pre-apprenticeship start on the apprentice journey, perhaps the things I would play back as being important is that apprentices actively explore what their programme will involve, perhaps before they've even become an apprentice, because maybe an apprenticeship's not for them. Building up a partnership approach, investigating career pathways, getting a clear picture of their strengths and areas for development, and developing their personal and social skills, because we are developing individuals for the world of work and the work of the world. And at that point, I'll hand over to Charlotte on ESD lens.
Thanks, Karen. So Karen's obviously talked about having our ship journey and making that as excellent as it can be for all of the different partners involved in that triadic relationship. I suppose I want to add an extra level, another lens to look at your provision through, and that's the ESD lens that I talked about earlier on. And I think there's two kind of, they're not grand enough to be frameworks, but two kind of approaches this is thinking about the ways that you can embed good ESD practice throughout the areas of influence that you have. And there's this model that's 4 C's, which I know doesn't necessarily translate well to all FE providers, but the concept's absolutely relevant. So one's thinking about your operations. So it says here campus, but your physical estate, the space that you work in, the daily procedures that you operate to. How can you weave sustainability through that? Not just so you're walking the walk, but also so that that's a learning opportunity in itself. Perhaps through the equipment that you use, perhaps through the way you work with others in your community in terms of travel. Perhaps it's about your energy usage. How do you operate? Are you walking the walk? And are there ways to engage your learners in that to help their learning too? Part of it is about the curriculum, making sure that what we teach is absolutely aligned to sustainable development goals. Kerrian talked about curriculum with intent, and I just love that phrase because I think it's really helpful to think about kind of what are the knowledge and the skills and the attributes that you need, where do they map to the occupational standards, and how do you supplement those with those kind of professional workplace skills that employers are looking for. Part of it is about the culture and the way that you operate as an organisation. How does it feel to be an apprentice with you? Is sustainability something that's covered in your inductions? Is it something that people are explicitly kind of having conversations about? Because I think one of the challenges with ESD at the moment is that there's bucket loads of inclusion of good sustainable development content in what we're teaching, what learners are learning, but it's not always explicit. Learners are reporting really low levels of exposure to sustainable development content at the end of their educational experiences, where we know that that's not how the teacher trainers see it. So really making sure that culture of sustainability is really explicit. And then finally, the community. And again, Kerrian's talked about the relationships that you have with local workplaces, with local employers, with your LEPs and your chambers of commerce. Those community relationships, and how can you work together to help embed sustainability in your work? Because at a local level, there's not a local authority in the country that's not thinking about their regional and kind of place-based response to sustainability too. So there's all sorts of ways that you can weave sustainability through your practice. And again, from a learner experience perspective, what are they learning? What are they picking the other activities you deliver? Again, Karen's talked about responsibilities or green skills that you can bring to any job, things that are included in that advice and guidance. And then finally, that subliminal curriculum. What do people just pick up by being apprenticeship? Is that how you write? So these kind of different models basically both say the same thing, which is there's multiple opportunities, whether that's through the classroom, through your work-based experience, whether that's through your relationships, whether that's through the day-to-day operations of your organisation, to weave sustainability through. And in terms of some examples of that, I thought I'd just share a few to bring them to life. Karen, it's the next slide, and that's let's think if you're, I mean, Carrie-Anne used a good example there from kind of hair and beauty. I think there's a second one on the slide there. But I heard last week from a training provider in Manchester, hairdressing and beauty, and they were talking about all the different ways that they were engaging their learners in thinking about the disposal of their products and their use of single-use disposable items, and the ways that they can work with multiple different people to make the experience of hairdressing and beauty more inclusive to diverse communities. So there's really, you know, rich ways that you can bring sustainability into that kind of career. From a food perspective, there's so much that you could do, whether that's better equipping people to provide vegan diets, plant-based diets, whether it's about understanding the sourcing of food, the ethics, as well as the kind of sustainability impacts of different food sources, the efficiency of working in a kitchen. There's whole ways that you can bring sustainable development messaging into how you work. Motoring, I don't know whether you saw last week, there was a report that showed that just 5% of mechanics feel equipped to service and support electric vehicles, which when but in 9 years the sale of internal combustion engine cars is not going to be the norm. You know, there's a big opportunity there that's obviously linked to successful career pathways for learners. And then the final one, the bottom left, is not a curriculum piece at all. It's a doctor bike session outside a provider in Glasgow, I believe, and this is about just equipping apprentices and equipping learners with ways to engage with active travel. You know, it's not about the formal curriculum, but it was a free bike mechanic that was there to help support learners and staff to get their bikes fixed so that they could participate in active travel. So not formally linked to the curriculum, but part of that culture. You know, visibly, cycling is something that people around here do, and enabling people to make more sustainable choices in their lives too. And I just wanted to signpost this fantastic resource. I can't claim it, it's not one of ours, but it's something that we are definitely signposting to because it's done a lot of work for us. And it's a UNESCO resource called Learning Objectives for the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a beast of a tome, but it identifies learning objectives and suggests topics and learning activities for each of the Sustainable Development Goals that I talked through earlier on. It describes implementation at different levels. And so it's not prescriptive, but it's a really great source of inspiration if you're thinking, okay, I'd like to do more around poverty alleviation with my course, or actually there's this really specific issue in our local community that I'd like to do more of through our work. Then this is a great resource to pick up and explore. But the ETF is producing and developing a number of resources and products and programs to help the FE sector embrace ESG. It's a developing area of support. We've only had a dedicated resource for this area for a few months, but we're looking at weaving ESG messaging throughout our CPD, continued professional programs, as well as developing original and curated ESG resources. So watch this space flag. But in addition to that, we're doing research. We've got a publication that's coming out in a couple of months' time looking at experiences of ESD across the sector, which we hope will be really useful for you to then pick up and think about how that reflects on experiences of your staff and learners, being a useful tool to we need to make sure that providers, teachers, leaders, people across the sector to really embrace ESD more readily, because at the moment it very much feels that the policy framework is there and it's definitely building in momentum, but it's not yet seen as a central part of our work. So there's a lot of work to be done. If you're a member of SET, the Society of Education and Training, then there's a lot of work coming out. Communication about what's going on, what effective practice exists, lots of inspirational stories. So yeah, it's a watch this space, but our contact details are at the end if you'd like to hear more about any of those items.
Thank you. And so finally, before we come to a question and answer session, that's presuming there are some questions in the chat or that you'd like to put some in. I just wanted to talk to you about our very recent apprenticeship workforce development support offer that's available at no charge that there was clearly a strong appetite for, because we have, in a very short amount of time, had a great number of people engaging with this CPD and feeding back very positively. So it really is in 4 strands: assessor to teacher, effective technical teaching, technical curriculum design, and then strategic leadership and governance. And actually, just to signpost really that we're working with AELP around a strategic leadership part of this. And there are webinars as well. And then having a look at some of this workforce development. So the assessor to teacher, and thinking about people who might want to move into technical teaching and training, who've previously been assessors, deciding how to teach and how we learn. Effective technical teaching about pedagogy and professional practice, and then how we prepare in a separate course for endpoint assessment success. And then looking for operational middle leaders and managers at curriculum design and practice, looking at pedagogy and models. And then within strategic leadership, looking at models, but also thinking about some of the things we've discussed today, thinking about how you do embed careers information, advice and guidance as a whole organisational approach. And as I've said, these courses, they're available via FutureLearn that you book via our ETF platform. They're available at no charge, and they're flexibly delivered. So you can engage with this as and when you like. And there's opportunities for social learning through them as well, and sort of working with peers. So please do take a look at those resources, because, you know, people are finding them to be of high value. And we thought we'd just kind of leave you, before we go into this question, with this kind of thought, that knowledge and learning are humanity's greatest renewable resources for responding to challenges and inventing alternatives. Yet education does more than respond to a changing world. And I think there we have, I mean, sorry, it's kind of gone a bit blurry on this, but, you know, we are preparing our apprentices and learners for the world of work and the work of the world, and hence the title for this session. But we want to come to you now and see if there have been any questions that you'd like us to address. So I think Charlotte's been monitoring the chat box, because I think you might all be muted.
I've put a lot of links in the chat box as we've been going along, Carrie, into some of the resources that you've posted. And the only thing I'd say is, as well as questions, particularly from an ESD perspective, because this is a new area for us, I'd love to hear examples from your experiences of ESD in practice, or of areas where you think CPD would be helpful, collaboration opportunities. You know, there's a shout out there. It's not just questions that would be useful at this stage, but yeah, there's an openness there.
Okay, so in the interim, whilst we are waiting for some questions, hopefully, to come in from the audience, I'd just like to ask a couple to you both. So, Carrie-Anne, with the wealth of information you've presented, where do you recommend providers start to enhance their apprenticeship provision?
So I think, you know, our new offer is a good place to start, because it's role-specific support that will really help. So people can think, you know, if I'm a teacher, maybe I want to look at the technical teaching, but I might be an operational middle leader who is also teaching. So I might look across those different courses. And I think actually there's the opportunity to look in the courses and kind of dip in and out of what you might need to learn more about. But the other apprenticeship development courses do, apprenticeship workforce development courses do, they signpost to other free of charge ETF support. And I think in the panel this morning, the opening panel, you know, there was a huge focus on the need for teachers and trainers to upskill in terms of their digital literacy. And so these courses signpost over to our digital professional development and enhanced platform, again, totally free of charge, that helps teachers and trainers move from exploring to adapting to leading in use of technology for educational learning, but also bringing in work practice. So actually the courses are really strong and signpost to other kind of CPD that's available at no charge.
Okay, fantastic. And Charlotte, is the ETF working with AELP on the Education for Sustainable Development agenda?
It's very timely. That question. We very much want to be working collaboratively with other sector bodies on our ESD work, and sector landscape. So I was speaking just yesterday. Paul Warner, who is the Director of Research and Development.
Correct.
I want to say is his job title. About what the opportunities are and what they look like. And I think we're at this stage really hoping to what AELP members and how can AELP and ETF work together to meet those needs, but also to make sure that there's a strong kind of FE voice that's shaping some of the policy drivers that will inevitably come back and shape the education sector's work. So how do we have a combined voice about why ESD is relevant to quality education and why this is an area where actually this sector needs more investment, so that we can really challenge. It's early days, but yes, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic.
Emily, I think, we have mentioned it previously, but I think it would be important to kind of think about, if people haven't taken a look at this, there's the FE roadmap resource, and there's going to be for FE providers and, across diverse settings, a lot of events through April. I know with the Association of Colleges, Charlotte's presenting in it from ETFs and so on. And it does give that roadmap, that kind of framework, whether you're a leader, manager, teacher, estates, it helps you to kind of think, how do you move from first engagement to having strong, embedded and impactful practice in terms of ESD, not just in the curriculum, but as Charlotte has said before, throughout the campus, your culture and how you work in your community. So, I would signpost that resource. It's fantastic.
Fantastic. And I can see that Charlotte's just popped the resource there for our delegates. So that was very timely too. Thank you, Charlotte. I just want to mention that all today's sessions will be available on as recordings to catch up on demand, and that does include the Ask the Apprentice roundtable that Carrie-Anne has mentioned a couple of times during this session as well. So you'll be able to catch up on that if you didn't during the lunchtime. So if anybody has got any questions, please do pop them through the chat panel now or via the Live Now panel, whatever is the easiest way for you. We may be approaching a slightly earlier finish, so you've got a bit longer to grab a coffee at this point. So if there's anything else that Carrie-Anne or Charlotte, would you like to add at all at this point?
I think the only other thing that I'll add is the course guides. When I discussed the 8 apprenticeship courses that have been developed, there's individual information sheets for those and links so you can read more about them. I think, Emily, I sent them through to you, so whether you're able to put that in the chat.
I should be able to. Bear with me one moment whilst I just grab that for you.
Because that would allow you then to explore each of the courses and what the kind of course content would be. And then you've got live links to ETF's website with all of the information about the apprenticeship workforce development offer. Yeah. Fantastic.
I've just popped that into the chat
Thanks
panel
so much.
as well. I'll do one final call for questions, and then what we'll do is we'll have a slightly longer break for this session. Okay, so we'll just see if anything comes in. Okay, so I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for attending this session, and thank you to Carrie-Anne and Charlotte for facilitating.